Hi, my name is Dion Ibarra, and I'm excited to take the next few minutes to answer some of the questions that you posed. So, what is my motivation for this work? I am Mexican American. I am a second generation here in California. I actually live on Ohlone land in the central coast of California, where my family settled. And the work of working with Indigenous people is deeply personal because my family is Indigenous. Our roots are on this land. And so in some way or other, all my adult life, I've worked in social justice initiatives that have tried to progress and bring equity to my people and other Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have been left behind. Okay. My work with Indigenous people started with working with the Nature Conservancy. I worked on a team called Indigenous People in Local Communities. We worked in 22 countries. I was on, again, it was a global team. And I was, again, an operations manager. And so I call it the administrative backstop. I worked again, on behalf of the different Indigenous partners that we had. I worked on their behalf so they could do work on the ground, and I was in the office for them. So I worked on coordinating teams throughout the world, helping them again with communications, helping them stay connected. I did legal work for them. I wrote contracts. I helped with some of the grants after they had been received. We'd help with keeping track of them. And I worked in, again, team building with everyone and doing anything that they needed me to do so they could, again, do work on the ground. And I could use my administrative experience as well as working across different teams to help them, again, stay coordinated and keep them really just focused on what they needed to be focused on. And again, doing that across the world was helpful to keep the teams in communication so they could learn from one another and they could see what was working for one another in other countries so they can sort of like share the knowledge that they needed to succeed in the initiatives, again, that they were doing on the ground, on behalf of their own communities. As far as social initiatives go, social justice initiatives, I just said a moment ago that social justice work has been something that I started just right out of the chute as a young person. And it began with, I was the first person to go to college in my family. And so that experience really opened me up to having seeing things in a new way, understanding things in a new way, and wanting to be a part of the movement at that time in the early 90s that was around the rights of field workers. My family, they were migrant field workers. And so I just started really simply with like working in Latino civil rights and working with small groups that needed help and support. I mean, we did big things like go to marches and get people to sign petitions, but I've always liked and appreciated and had the passion to share what I feel is wrong with things, as well as I learned a long time ago that it's important to use my voice for what I'm for. And so really speaking on the behalf of people who didn't have a voice or felt that they didn't. the education that I got really gave me the confidence to be able to speak on behalf of others. And then becoming a young mom, I saw pretty quickly how I was treated as a young mom of color. And so that led me on a path for the next, I'd say, 15 years into my late 30s to help women around birth. And it's still an issue, the discrepancy with women of color and the health disparity when it's time for them to have their babies. And so that was a passion of mine for a long time. And helping women have healthy birth outcomes was my main work. And again, coming back to another social initiative, I started a nonprofit 13 years ago, and I'm currently the executive director of that nonprofit. And that was about bringing people of color, youth of color, into a relationship with the ocean. That was driven by seeing, again, a disparity of the lack of women in ocean conservation environments, as well as especially women of color. And so I've been working and doing that work for 13 years. And again, because I always can't just do one thing in my past, I've also, in the last probably 5 years, been on the Civil Rights Commission for our county, which is an appointed position where I've been the chair up until this last year, as well as the Commission on the Status of Women. And so there are so many different areas that we work on in both of those commissions that bring about social justice. So there's just so many ways that I have paved paths to, again, work on the behalf of others. Okay, let's see. My experience with data management, data sovereignty, museum collections researchers, universe research repositories. I have no direct experience in working directly in any of these, in any of this field. What I know about data, data management, and data research is from the aspect of learning to do research as part of my academic work. And so I have that experience. I am very well aware, especially from getting my master's right now in social work. It's not the first time it's come up, but in the social work program, definitely it is a focus on how data is managed and understanding data sovereignty for communities to have the rights over their histories and how things are held, and even that researchers and data managers that, again, I always look into fields like, where are people of color not seen? And when we're not seen in those areas, then it's very likely that we're not going to be represented. And so I do know and understand that when it comes to data sovereignty and data collection and research, that especially Indigenous people have been left out of their own histories and controlling and having a voice and having ownership of that history, and not only the past, but what's happening in the present and for the future. And I am always, the reason why I started the nonprofit I did was to start to create a pipeline for people of color to move into the environmental sciences, mostly because of the concerns around climate change and how climate change will affect people of color most significantly, as well as women. And so what I've been working on the last 13 years is creating that pipeline to give them exposure, to give young people of color exposure to the ocean, a relationship with the ocean, environmental sciences, so they can start to see a future in a way that they can have a voice in the areas of science that are going to be the most important for our communities. And so I can see how Indigenous people are now and have been actually for a while creating that pipeline also for themselves to have this voice. And working with the Indigenous team that I was on, I saw that happening globally. And the work was very inspiring because the changes that had been being made in their communities were already being seen in one generation. And so doing this work, doing the work that you're doing, and having an opportunity to be able to lead in a way that I can bring my experience and my expertise to a team that is doing this work, again, is deeply personal. And I believe one of many ways, but really, because this is such a niche opportunity, it really is a unique way, again, for me to be able to bring, which would be the answer to the next question, my nonprofit leadership experience. And this is where my expertise lies as an executive director, having had the experience now for 13 years. You're asking about an approach to working with a startup nonprofit. I was just asked a question in an interview. They were asking me if I thought we were still a startup, or when does a startup end? How long are you still a startup? And we're 13 years in. And I said, I think we're still in the startup window. I think it could be maybe 20 years before we're out of that sort of startup cocoon. But my nonprofit leadership in specifically a startup position is, I have learned that what it takes to be in a startup, because there are so many unknowns, and working in unknowns aren't always comfortable for people. Many people would want to come into an executive director position in a position that was already established and already had everything set in its ways, and they could walk in and perhaps create new ways of being under their personal leadership type. But having the knowns are more of a comfortable space for more people. Where I don't know why I'm like this, but I feel like it's a blessing, because I do well in uncomfortable spaces. I do well in unknowns. I do well with someone saying, this happened, what do we do? And I can answer and say, okay, let's start problem solving it. And I can start to see ways of being that many people haven't, or I have the ability to also see ways that, again, are unknown, and I can create the buy-in from other people to bring them along, because there's a lot of things that I trust. I have a lot of ways of trusting in a direction that I'm going, because of the expertise that I surround myself with. And that comes from employees, it comes from board of directors, it comes from other leadership. And so when I feel solid in that, I know that we can move forward. But again, in a startup, there's funding that needs to happen. I've learned how to get funding. I've learned how to ask for funding. I've learned that we have to be flexible. I've learned that things can go one way and you can go, and they'll change. And so I'm flexible with change. Change doesn't scare me. I'm actually motivated by the challenges that a startup energy brings. And as far as leadership goes, I work with, again, being in like the operations team and being the only operations manager, even that was a place of leadership, because I had to work again with people who are in all corners of the world, and they had to trust that I was going to lead them in the way, and bring them the tools they needed in an operations capacity to help bring them success. And in the nonprofit work, my own personal nonprofit work, I have been a leader not only for myself in my own team that I started here in California, but our work has also gone global. And so I think the global work really has expanded the ways that I communicate, the ways that really the time that I can take to develop relationships with really, really diverse people. And when I'm working with diverse people as a leader, I want to bring us together and unite in what we have in common. What is our common thread? Because of our diversity, we need to have it, because we need the eyes of all. We need everybody's different viewpoints and experiences to do the work that needs to be done. But the differences can also create some challenges and communications and different communication styles. And so that's where I feel like I really can be open and be a conduit to help bring that diversity together and on the same page. And the social work program that I'm just finishing has really expanded my awareness of the micro, the macro, and the meso influences that we all have and that we all come with. And that, especially as a leader, that I need to see and understand each one of those levels to work with people successfully. And that's where I feel like the real personal relationship building and the relationship, the awareness that relationships are important is where I feel my strength is as an executive director, as well as the many, many tasks, especially in a startup, that an executive director needs to take on, because it's possible that not all of the positions are filled that need to be filled. And so in the role as the executive director, it's important that we sort of have get the landscape of all of the work that our organization is doing. And I'm going to bring this back up to your questions around the data management, sovereignty, museum collections research, the second question, where I'm not strong in those skills. And I'm just going to share one little antidote to that. When I first started the nonprofit that I'm the founder of, it was like the first year, and I walked into a meeting with the bookkeeper and the accountant, and we were having a discussion about our financials. And we were supposed to be having the conversation, but they were having the conversation, because at that time, I didn't know what they were talking about. They were talking about documents that I had never heard of, that a P&L, they were using like, acronyms, letters, P&L, what is that? P&L, what does that mean? And I sat there in that meeting not knowing anything that they were talking about. And when I left, I said to myself, I am never going to let that happen ever again. I am not going to be an executive director that walks into a meeting and cannot understand my own organization. While I do not need to be the expert in every area of my organization, because that's why I hire experts. That's why I have a board of directors, because I rely on them to give me information that I need to know more about. But I did learn that there are many things that the executive director needs to have insight about, it needs to have knowledge about, and I learned, because I'm the leader of the organization and I need to go and have discussions on behalf of pretty much every topic that my organization is a part of. And so while I don't need to have PhD in that area, I certainly need to have a level of knowledge and expertise. And so while I may lack the experience in some of the areas that you're doing work in, I can learn them, and I'm open to learn them, and I'm excited to learn them, because I believe that my experience as an executive director can leverage the work that you're doing and work to bring it to the place that your board of directors has decided your organization wants to go. And so I hope for another opportunity to speak with you. Thank you for this time. And yeah, just many thanks.